Welcome everyone to Reclamation, a beEmboldened initiative where we focus on the prevention of and healing from spiritual abuse. Many of you listened to our recent conversation with Josh Berger, and it was on the topic of narcissism. So why many of you listened to it. I know that connects with many, many people in our audience. If you are someone who has not listened to it yet, I just want to give a note that this current conversation, it's still going to make sense for you. So you're welcome to continue to tune in and listen to this all the way through. I would recommend, though, going back and checking out the other episode too, if you're able, because it is going to provide more of a foundation for narcissism in connection with individuals versus what we're focusing on today, which is narcissistic structures or systems. So again, not that you have to go back, we'll do a little bit of a recap at the beginning here, but I do think that you would find some value in it if you're enjoying this episode. Today, we're going to focus again on the structures and the systems, like what do they look like? How do we identify them? How do we approach a system versus an individual? If we even approach it all, do we even take that on? With that, I'm excited to welcome Josh back. He is a licensed professional counselor and supervisor, and he serves as the CEO of River's Edge Counseling and Wellness. He works with a variety of clients. He specializes in trauma, PTSD, and narcissistic personality disorder. He has a master's in clinical mental health counseling from Denver Seminary, and he has worked in the counseling field for over 15 years. So with that, Josh, I'm going to jump into our first question here in a second, but I want to open with what we were chatting about actually before we hopped on, which was the prep for this episode. What was that like for you? I know you shared there were some things that were kind of going on in your mind and heart as you were preparing, excuse me.
Absolutely. So I think one of the things that I noticed just as I was preparing for not talking about narcissists themselves, like the first episode, but actually being able to talk about systems that are equally narcissistic or harmful, where there's no one clear narcissist, but kind of the organization itself is narcissistic, is the fact that the themes are so common that even just recording this, I kind of thought some people might feel outed or almost like information was disclosed that wasn't. And so there's so much on here that it's like, man, if you resonate with that, or if you're like, man, I think Josh has visited my church, or I think he's visited, this nonprofit ministry I've been at. Good chance I haven't, first off. And even more importantly, good chance that then that means actually you're not alone in what you've been through, because so much of this trauma that can occur, so much of the spiritual abuse and the authoritarian structures, when they tend to kind of go narcissistic, they tend to feel eerily similar. And so my hope is that this is actually a moment of being able to relate, to be able to have some language for what you may have experienced, because very often these systems are harder to heal from than trauma from an actual narcissist. And that's why we're identifying these things and walking through just even what it looks like if you've been in the system or even if you're currently in one.
Ooh, Josh, just that statement that you made that it can be harder to heal when we have come out of a narcissistic system than individual narcissism that we've had to engage with. Let's definitely make sure, I don't want to get too far ahead and jump there right now, but I want to make sure everyone heard that, because I felt it when he said that. I'm like, oh yes, I'm sure many of you did too. So I definitely want to make sure we come back to why is that the way that it is. So none of you can remind me because you're not actually live right now. I'm talking to you in the future. So none of you can be like, hey, Naomi, you forgot. So we'll remember, right, Josh?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. What are the primary traits of narcissism? Again, this is just going to be a little recap before we move forward. For those who have not heard episode 1, again, this is going to stand on its own, give you a little bit of a footing before we move forward.
Yeah, so there's 3 main traits. And if you look at, DSM-5, DSM, diagnostic criteria, they've kind of had this continuing evolution of just kind of better understanding what narcissism is and why it's so hard to heal from. In fact, only in, I'd say, the past 5 years has it become more understandable that there actually are people who can heal from even being diagnosably narcissistic or diagnosably having a personality disorder. Research was done earlier, but that's still kind of a point of tension. Place you get a lot of therapists really mad at each other if you brought it up in a mixed setting like that. But one of the things I think is important is to simplify what those 3 main traits are. So if we're trying to boil it down to really what you're looking for when you're thinking of someone is narcissistic, is whether or not they have very black and white thoughts, whether they have an elevated view of themselves or their calling or their sense of purpose, that elevated view, And then, of course, the classic little to no ability for true empathy. And so these three traits of black and white thoughts, elevated or grandiose view, and then little to no empathy, they self fulfill one another. What that means is just kind of like if you twist a screw into a wall or into a board, it naturally digs deeper and deeper. Each of these thoughts then tends to self fulfill and reaffirm the other. And so it's one of the things that we've seen, unfortunately, that people that are often just seem a little type A or that seem mildly narcissistic, and they have a good heart, they seem like they're really trying to do things for the Lord well. It's like we're not really recognizing the fact that they're going to, over time, especially if they're successful, each of those areas are going to progress and worsen. And the narcissistic thought patterns are actually going to deepen and become worse and more extensive over time. So I've said before, for many people, if they have these three traits, there's a good chance they weren't all that narcissistic in their 20s, but they're going to get worse in their 30s and 40s and 50s, especially going unchecked, because they've just kind of reaffirmed these own truths that cause them to feel special and like they're the only one that has things right and everyone else is, well, kind of easily discarded.
How does this carry over then when we're looking at a system? What does that look like?
It's a great question. So one of the big things I think that carries over is those three traits we're still looking for. So if you have listened to the first episode, I think that does help. But now you're not thinking of, John or Jane Doe, the narcissist, that whether they're very obvious in their flamboyancy and arrogance or if they're more covert. Now we're looking at a situation that really feels like this church, this nonprofit, like they're kind of the city on the hill. They're the place that really is just doing better work than others. So whether it's we have the best community in the whole city, or we're the ones that really understand scripture better. You often see a lot of theology kind of touted, and I've heard it from both sides. It's not just one denomination or another, but kind of the idea of like, well, our theology, our understanding of scripture is just so much better than others. Or you see a place that then becomes very much like really kind of caring for the main group of the church, but anyone that's kind of a nuisance, the one, if you think of the old parable of the one and the 99, you see a lot of people kind of getting pushed to the sides, marginalized, or even cast out. And so we'll talk about this a lot more, but those are some of the initial kind of playing outs of black and white thoughts, an elevated view, and then little to no empathy, especially from people that they deem troublesome or just kind of a poor use of their very important time.
Oh, I wish we were all together, like us and listeners, viewers, we're all together in a room right now because I really want to be, not that we would do this, it's not actually a good clinical practice, but everyone raise your hand if you have seen this play out. And I'm like, probably every single hand is going up. So all of you at home, you can humor me if you want. Raise your hand right now. Comment if you did, please. I would love to see that comment. But yes, all of that, yes. And it carries over into big mega churches and little house churches. Whatever, as long as it's not, we'd be looking at individual. If it's like, if I'm looking at my group, it would be easy to say, well, it was individual because my dad was the founder and leader. He was, the guy.
Sure.
And yet there still was a setup with his right hand people and his left hand people and where it's like, no, there was more of a systemic issue, which is why I don't only take issue with my dad. I take issue with some of the others who were playing into the problem. They were on board with it. They were worsening it and they were getting something out of it. It wasn't strictly them being duped, them being deceived. It wasn't them being abused necessarily, depending on who I would be referencing. There can be some, oh no, we're a part of the greater system and we're continuing the narrative because there is some benefit as well. And in my group, when I'm referencing that, it was having more than one spouse. That's what it was about. There was a group of men, and that was the goal. Was okay, I can have many women.
Yeah.
So it wasn't like being the woman in that situation. I'm not saying that none of the men were being abused, none of the men were being taken advantage of. I'd be taking it definitely too far. But there were instances where there was this whole structure that had been set up, and it wasn't strictly one person who was making it harder for others. There were other people who were also making it harder for others. But I think that does lead me to a question, Josh, for you about if there is a central figure, would you consider it more so with what I just shared? I'm wondering about your feedback on that. Would you consider it more so, okay, no, it's more narcissistic behavior on this one person, it's less systemic? Or would you say, no, it is systemic. It started with one person. It's now become systemic. How do you kind of like disentangle that?
Yeah. No, I think one of the areas I look at, and this is because I'm a therapist and because I've worked a lot with people who have diagnosable personality disorders, is often looking at that central leader, right? And being able to say, okay, is that person, pretty moderate on the spectrum or even severely narcissistic, right? If there's kind of that imaginary scale, like we talked a little bit last time. And if it's not clear to me, then it's like, okay, I'm probably talking more about a system that has been set up, usually intentionally, in my opinion, to protect leadership, to make sure that whoever is in charge is the one that stays in power. And there's much more of me almost defaulting to this second area that we're talking about today of the narcissistic system. So there are plenty of times, of course, when there is someone who's a narcissist and even diagnosable in leadership or at the top. I just think a lot of times we don't get to know that, and we don't get to really be sure of their level of unhealth, but we still feel the harm. Kind of like we started talking about, like it can actually be harder to heal from these areas. We feel the harm, we feel the pressure, we feel the being cast out, shamed, or judged, even just by having innocent questions or concerns in some areas. And so very often, instead of trying to figure out how narcissistic is Jane or John Doe, I think it's healthier to just be able to look at the whole organization and say, wait, is this organization causing harm? Do they use a lot of jargon, a lot of kind of, are you with us or against us, black and white thoughts played out in the organization? Are they willing to care for people who are going to take a little more time with their questions or concerns? Or is it basically assimilate or be cast out? And so usually, to come back to your question, I think it actually is more a narcissistic system that causes just as much harm as a narcissist. But sometimes we don't quite have the language for that yet.
Right. Or like you mentioned, the access to the information to know. Yeah. And if it's a key person or if it's not, if it's a group of people. And not that a group of narcissists play really well together, but there can be this element of, oh, we're all on the same team, though, for this bigger goal that we have with this following and this us versus them mentality. So I can see that working to a degree. And yet there's also a point where I think it ends up really being a moot point, because if ultimately the organization is functioning in this way, the origin story, while it can help us in our understanding of how these kinds of things happen, it is still a problematic organization now, because it is functioning in that us versus them, in that elitism, and that, yeah, we've got it right. We're doing missions right. We're outperforming all the other churches in the neighborhood and all these kinds of things. And that ultimately is our landing place that we have to make decisions around. So again, I think the origins can be helpful in making sense of how did we get here? How do we not get here? I want to make sure we don't land here. We'll talk more about some of that. If you find yourself in a system this is sounding familiar to you, we still do have a problem. There's definitely decisions to be made. And so we'll talk more about that too. Like, what do you do when that's relevant to you? But starting more at kind of the beginning stage, what are the early warning signs? So whether we're talking about a church, a nonprofit, a business, if it is starting to develop these sorts of narcissistic traits, how are you going to identify that, hopefully as early on as possible?
Yeah. So here's some signs I would tend to look for. No one sign is going to be like a clear, oh my gosh, you have a narcissistic system and therefore get out. But when you start to see several of these areas, I think it's important to really kind of trust your intuition, and notice that something is concerning here. And so one of the things that I see that's actually a very neutral thing by itself is the idea of how the nonprofit or how the church measures growth. How much do they bring that up? I've heard different pastors that are like, yep, that's the first thing I look at on Monday morning is just how many seats were filled. And I'm like, that's an interesting way to start your week. Again, plenty of people do it. We need to keep doors open of hopefully good, healthy places. But you start to notice not necessarily what is said, but how often it is communicated that, you know what, we got this number of small groups, our organization has raised this amount, we've grown by this percentage this year over year. And what I find is very often that tells you their language, their voice tells you where their heart is for these organizations. And so I'm all for healthy growth. I'm all for organizations that are caring for people and doing good things to continue to thrive. But so many times those organizations actually aren't sitting there just talking about that constantly. Not every conversation needs to feel like a fundraiser or kind of a brand logo assimilator. And so that would be one of the first areas you see is just not necessarily that the growth is said, but how often is it said in how many different ways, especially when you get into leadership meetings, whether that's discipleship, whether that's a volunteer group, whatever, you just hear more and more of, oh, this is how we evaluate how powerful we are as a systemic organization. So that'll be the first area. Similar to that, I would say also how much they have brand and logan and kind of slogans, jargon in their language. This is an area that I find is very often a shortcut for us, a shortcut as Americans, really, for us not needing to think much. So very often you can see this. You can see this all over the political spectrum right now. On both sides, there's this area of if you say these statements and you agree, then you're with us. And if you're not necessarily saying, okay, yes, we're going to, reach the men, we're going to reach the city, we're going to make sure we care for this organization is going to care for this city all the time. It's not that those are always bad, but it is concerning to me when it becomes like, okay, I think we just kind of went on autopilot. Like we kind of left our brains at the door, so to speak, because we just have all these catchphrases as an organization. And particularly what I find for narcissistic organizations is these are often ways to say, are you with us or do you need to leave? If you don't agree with our main mission, if you don't agree with what we're doing, then you probably don't belong and you will feel ostracized or even kind of excommunicated, for a very old-timey church term, from the organization. So those would be the first two. There's a lot more we could talk about that, and I could even share some quotes that I've heard from different places. Again, these are places that I think I've heard enough of these from similar places that it almost is copy and paste for who said what.
Yes. Well, and let's go ahead and share those in one moment. I just want to comment that it does. It really bothers me when I see that. I would consider it almost a hyper focus on the numbers. Yes. How many, what was the income or the number of attendees? And it's something that I try to be really cautious of at beEmboldened because we care about the qualitative, like were lives impacted? Did the services hit the mark of being helpful? Like were people helped? Do people feel more informed? Do they feel like they're able to take the next step forward towards the goals that they have? Are they feeling more equipped in prevention of revictimization? Are they like, yes, I feel confident in being able to open up my Bible and double check something and be able to catch if something's gone off course, or, those kinds of things. Like that's what we're wanting to take a look at. And yet there can be such an automatic of, year-end reports, like how many people were served and how many dollars came in and it's like, no, like, what testimonials do we have? Like what stories have been told? What emails have we gotten that made us cry because like, oh my gosh, like we're so honored and humbled to be a part of that person's story in the way that we've been a part of it. And at the same time, I do recognize that there is a place for the numbers. There's a place for that
Absolutely.
metric in terms of if nobody's coming, maybe we got to reevaluate something, right?
Sure.
It's like,
yeah,
well,
you can't
if
keep the lights
nobody's
on if no one's showing up.
exactly right. and even it's not even really helping much if nobody's showing up. And I'm saying that again, I'm saying that as a nonprofit organization right now. And a church, it may very well be a small church. It could very well be a small nonprofit as well. And so this idea that it has to be really big and it has to be, numbers have to be in the thousands or the tens of thousands or the hundreds of thousands, depending on what we're talking about, in order for it to be impactful, that is definitely untrue. So I want to connect this too, Josh, with there being a place for numbers, but then we can't have this distortion that happens. So, and when you're trying to measure like excellence and leadership, things like that, how does this start to kind of get skewed?
Yeah. So you actually, I think, kind of modeled a great check there that I don't think happens in a lot of narcissistic systems. You just took a pause, right? As a leader of a nonprofit, as someone that absolutely needs to know the measurements, needs to know the metrics, and was like, okay, how do I better show authentic healing, health, that, hey, something good is happening here in a way that is not just us doing the very same thing, right? I don't think narcissistic systems, and especially not when they have leaders that kind of fall into that path, they don't have that check. There's just like, well, obviously we're doing great things. Look at the numbers. Obviously we're doing the Lord's work, or, we're doing the right thing. We have it figured out. We kind of have the secret sauce and our formula works. And so it's almost like the numbers then dismiss self-evaluation or dismiss introspection, or even just like I think scripture talks a lot about being stewards. Very much, I think any good leader in a system that's trying not to be narcissistic, man, you know what? You can do great work and 100,000 people can show up or one person can show up. And we see that all the time in scripture. We just tend to not like those verses as much as Americans. We tend to think, nope, you do good work and tons of people will show. And life's more complicated than that. So you modeled that check really well. And I think being able to do it in a way for an organization that, is healthy, right? Or very much we're always trying to be healthy. It's a pause. It's a level of, okay, how do we communicate the authentic health, the real stories in a way that we're not taking responsibility or saying this is because Josh or Naomi are a big deal. We're just saying it because it's like, this is great that God's moving, that good things are happening, and truly meaning that and not just being a cliche.
I think in the kind of work that I do and that you do, where we hear people's stories and we get to come alongside them and be a part of that in a particular way for a particular period of time. And I think that has helped in ways keep this perspective, because it would be easy to look at organization A or organization B and think, wow, their numbers in 1 month might be what I see in 9 to 12 months. And yet, tragically, I hear stories of people who have come out of said organization A or organization B. And so I get to hear it's not just the numbers, because there can be harmful impact that's happening behind the scenes. And so knowing those kinds of things, they are heartbreaking to find out. And yet again, they're convicting of, yeah, this is the direction to continue in, because that quality, that integrity, the approach is of the utmost importance. And so it keeps that front and center as we move forward. And again, I think in the kind of role that I take on and that you would take on in your work, there's things that we get to see that I think help us stay connected in a way that understandably would be maybe take more intentionality if someone was more removed from the people that their organization is serving. I know that's something too. I know we were chatting about that actually too before we pressed record, of we both really value always keeping that connection. It's just so important, no matter what else, our time is being spent on, and our different focus may go. Like, it's important to have that. So I share all of this. Hopefully it will be helpful for people as you're thinking through what you're looking for moving forward, as you're looking at different organizations to engage with in any kind of way, not necessarily a church or otherwise. This can play into corporate America, what kind of company you're going to work for. I worked for a secular organization that very much prioritized its people. Very much so. Oh my goodness. In fact, I learned a lot about how to do that from this company. And then I've had the opposite. And
Wonderful.
so, yeah, what are we looking for?
Yeah.
So, Josh, before we move forward in other questions, because we might segue a little bit, I do want to go back to some of those examples that you were speaking to, because it might give more, concrete for people who are unsure.
Yeah. So again, with that growth mindset, meaning like numbers mindset, that's where you can even see some quotes. I think too, even before we dive into those, look at when you're joining an organization or you're looking for those early warning signs. There's kind of that level of, okay, how do they treat the lowest paid staff member? How do they treat the part-time help? How do they treat volunteers? So often you'll see as one of the earlier signs, just people that overall are worn out, that are tired, and they're working for the organization because they really believe in, the company, the ministry, the organization, and what they're doing. But you just see you see the bags under their eyes, you see the tiredness, and very often a feeling of like, I hope this gets better, but I don't want to say anything. And so that's probably what leads in a lot to even some of these quotes that I've heard from multiple places over the years. So, like, for example, I've heard from different organizations the idea of, so long as our front door is bigger than our back door, then we're fine. So long as our front door is bigger than our back door, we're fine.
Just numbers.
Just
not
numbers.
Faces.
Yeah. I've also heard a lot of people say things that are like, you know what, look at our fruit. Look at how many people are coming to the Lord, like we mentioned a little bit earlier. Look at how many small groups, how much money we've raised, how many kids we've served. None of those are bad, but you notice how then it's justification for we must be doing something especially right. Another area I've seen, and this is often true. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, Josh, I wanted to jump in there before you go into the next one, because I want to just remind all of us what the fruits of the Spirit are. So when we're looking at fruit, we're not looking at other kinds of fruit despite these ones. So love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. So those are fruits of the Spirit, right? So when we're talking about good fruit, we're not going to see fruit of numbers and growth and have that be, it's worth not having any fruits of the Spirit. No, we're talking about a faith-based organization. Absolutely not.
Yeah.
No, that is not going to be fruit from God if we aren't exhibiting those behaviors.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not saying perfectly, but we're striving for it, and we are owning it when we don't, and we're apologizing, we're making it right, and we're, all of those things that we talk about oftentimes on our podcast. So I just want to bring that into play. I think defining fruit, right? Defining fruit is important, and how we achieve said fruit is important. Yeah. So please go ahead.
No, I'm so glad you share that, because I think that's even where, even this word that's used in a lot of Christian circles of fruit, it's like those are the real fruits that we hear about, right? The real fruit of the Spirit, not all these other things that are just easy metrics or evidence. So now to shift away from metrics, to shift away from just growth, because there's plenty of narcissistic systems out there that don't care about this. And I would hate for us to overly go in that direction. I think the next area with those black and white thoughts are a lot of certain beliefs that are used to kind of sift through people. So another trait that I see very often from a system that's narcissistic is I see places that are kind of delineators. So like, okay, do you really believe in these 5 core tenets? Can you fully get behind these different areas? What do you think about Ephesians 5? What do you think about different types of covenant versus other theologies? All of these different things, especially when you're in groups that are very, Bible based, are very often a way to say, oh, then do you belong or not? And especially when you talk about things that have some visibility, like complementarian versus egalitarian, I so often see this being a way for anyone that has questions, or anyone that is like, hey, I'm not sure if I completely, believe that brand, that kind of rubber stamp of, are you with us or not? You tend to get relegated. You tend to get kind of dismissed or kind of pushed to the outer circles of the organization. And this can happen in any number of ways. I've seen people that wanted a little more slowness to worship all of a sudden be kind of pushed out of the worship team. I've seen people that are like, hey, I don't think we're really caring for certain team members well, or hey, from the front, I heard this statement and I know what you meant, but I think it could have been misinterpreted. All of a sudden, the emails don't get responded to. I've seen employees be afraid to actually speak up in staff meetings for fear of losing their job. And so all of these types of signs of just how does feedback get handled, and how does theology or core tenets, how rigid are people with those? This is another area just as devastating as the metrics obsession that is often an early warning sign.
So when someone is in an environment and they're doing what you're saying, like they're going through these steps, not that they're steps, but they're having these conversations, they're asking these questions, they're saying, okay, wow, this is how I'm treated. They find themselves in this situation. Do you have a recommendation based on your expertise in narcissism as to how they're going to respond? Like the person who is receiving the problematic feedback, what are they going to do?
No, especially in systems, it's a little harder to see. And I think this is where a lot of the harm can happen, is there's a lot of minimizing or dismissing. So sometimes it's, oh yeah, you know what? I don't know the answer, but so-and-so, the director, the pastor, the leader would, and I'm just not saying it right. But then you can't get on that person's schedule to get good answers, to be able to hear. It's like, oh, we'll go listen to the sermon, or even dare I say it, the podcast, that didn't really answer your questions, but you've been told that's what you're supposed to believe. So it's not often, it can be a yelling, a really harsh feedback, but very often it's more of kind of that just kind of fuzzy, kind of cloudy version of just being dismissed or told, hey, you need to just kind of figure that out. I've seen sometimes where this is a shame response of, do you think you're bigger than God? I've seen times where, particularly in very unhealthy places, like, hey, you need to have faith. So all these little tritisms and slogans kind of creep in, and very much a belief of just like, hey, if you can't figure this out relatively quickly, so that one coffee, a lot of pressure to come along and to assimilate in that one coffee or one meeting, then you're kind of treated as a leper. You're kind of ostracized or even distrusted in certain ways. And so it's first the dismissing or the kind of, fuzzy, we'll look over here for the quick answer. And then it's the action afterwards of all of a sudden you feel outside in different ways or shamed in different ways.
Right, which is this sense of, I cannot remember, I had someone bring this to my attention. And so there's a specific person who talks about this, and I am not going to be able to tell you who it is. So I want to credit her, but I can't tell you who she is in this moment. But someone brought my attention to this idea, having listened to her on a podcast, of feeling like you're in trouble, and how as adults, if we have this child feeling of like, oh my gosh, I'm in trouble. Like that's incongruent with being an adult.
Yes.
Among one another, to have the sense of like, I'm in trouble with another adult. Now, I could definitely be approached and be told, you did this and this wrong, and here's the consequence. And it's like, and I may have all kinds of feelings about that. But to have this like fear, like I have to withdraw into myself and kind of curl up and get really small because I'm in trouble, there's something off about that. Again, that's not the same as I didn't do something for my job and now there's a consequence, or whatever that looks like, or you didn't do this at your kiddo's school and you're getting a phone call or something. Like, it's not the same response depending on the approach. Now, that is something too, I will say, there is some element of that I needed to work through in my 20s, because I was more apt to have that response because of the upbringing that I'd had.
Of course.
And so there was some growth there for me as I was developing. There was also this recognition that I had too, though, that it was certain types of personalities that I'd have that response to. It wasn't just everybody. And so there was a similarity. And I'm like, wait, this person, one, does have some sense of power and control over me, as in like I could lose my job or whatever it is. They were a professor. I could get a bad grade. They could fail me. So there was this, not totally perception, from a perspective standpoint, there was some power over me. Like they could do something and I may not like the outcome. But that was a big common thread. And so I wanted to share that because I think oftentimes that's the cases we're finding ourselves in when we're struggling in these narcissistic systems. Is there is something they could do. Like if they could kick you out, that's not nothing. If you could lose your job, which could mean you lose your home, if you could lose the respect of your spouse, or maybe even lose yourself. I mean, there's all kinds of very, very high stakes conversations that we're referencing here. And when that's the case, yeah, it's going to matter a whole lot. But if we have this sense of I'm in trouble, that's at least something to pause and take a look at. Now, I'm not saying that that it wouldn't be connected at all with your past and maybe something that it's telling you for you. There's also most likely something it's telling you for them or for the system as well. And I wouldn't want to miss that element. It's a really important element. It's going to clue you into, wait, something's off here.
Yeah. And I think that's part of what you see that's more nuanced in these environments is that kind of paternal or maternal leadership structure. Not that they're saying, I'm your dad or I'm your mom from the front. It's way more soft than that. But that same feeling you're just saying, I think is so telling of there's something about, we are less than, and the director, the pastor, the whoever up, is greater than. They're wiser, they're smarter, they're, better and more defined in some way. And that's the reason why I absolutely have healthy conflict, all for that, and get hard feedback. And you may not love it, but it doesn't cause you to feel like that little 5-year-old boy or girl that's been scolded and put in the corner. And so I think you're naming something that's harder to identify, but you can kind of feel it when it starts to happen, especially when you're in trouble.
Yes. So when someone they're resonating with what we're talking about. Let's say there's someone who's listening right now, Josh, and they're like, okay, I'm in a system like this right now. And I know that you mentioned earlier that it's harder to heal from, but before we get to how to heal from, how does someone extricate themselves from this environment? What is that process like?
Yeah. So I think it's important to note that you're not usually going to get the last word as you extricate yourself. And I hope for many of your listeners today that they have an ability to not let the hooks that so often keep someone in a system like this. There's not so many hooks they can't feel like they have agency, that they can't get out of the system. And so one of the first things I would say is just kind of stealing your mind a little bit, being aware that there's probably going to be some gossip. You're probably not going to be able to say things in the way that's as true or accurate as you or I would wish for them. That's part of why it's a narcissistic system. They will gossip more. They will say more hard things. There will be more kind of trying to punish on your way out the door. And so in order to do the opposite, I think you try to basically calmly and quietly and uninterestingly leave the organization. So many of us have heard about the gray rock method for talking with a narcissist. It's the idea of you're kind of just boring, you're kind of bland, you don't really engage or cause a lot of conflict. You realize you're in one of these systems and you've said, you know what, I think it is wise for me to just get out. Hopefully you're in the earlier stages of being kind of tied in. Just the simple email of, hey, I'm not going to be in this small group anymore, or hey, I wanted to give you my 2 weeks notice. Thank you for your time and for this opportunity, but I've seen other places that I need to be. Anything that's very bland, very uninteresting as you just slowly leave, it makes it less likely that you get more of a target on your back. And for many organizations, they're so busy with people anyway, right? If you're going kind of quietly, they are less likely to make an example, to punish, or to try to even, in their mind, waste their time with one person.
Here's what I really like about this approach. I really like that it enables you to actually leave without getting, in some way, shape, or form, bullied into staying.
Yes.
There are times where we just need to get out first.
Yeah.
And that may be the end of it. It may not just be first, it might be first all the way through last is, okay, we had to get out. We're out.
Yeah.
I have a lot of conversations with people, and I went through this journey myself of, okay, is there a point where I'm going to say something? But we're not there yet. We have to get out. So even if you're someone who's thinking, well, I want to alert people. I want to warn people. I want to talk about this now. I want to share. I want to advocate. These are all wonderful things.
Absolutely.
And I would consider the timing of those things. Because if you are dealing with a system that is narcissistic, just like we talked about, right, Josh, when we were talking about an individual, we're not confronting that person and trying to work it out. We have seen this isn't going to work in this time and place. Yep. Maybe something changes someday. Lord have mercy. Maybe something changes someday, but this is where we're at. And I have to get out. I need to back away. I need to back my family away if I have family involved. And then we can reassess. We're going to need some time and space. We're going to need some time to heal, to make sense of what exactly all of that was. If we were involved in it for any period of time, maybe we're just visiting somewhere. We're like, oh, wait, we see flags. We're going to continue on. Wonderful. But it's not the time. And I've absolutely had these conversations with my family before, with my immediate family, where we found ourselves, kind of in this or that. And it's like, we know we're not going to get anywhere in this conversation. There's maybe been some attempts. We've seen the responses, and we've just got to back away. We don't need to blow it up. We don't want to blow it up. And it's not out of fear. Now, if you have some fear, that is fair. I am not coming at you having some fear. I would have so much empathy for that. Yes. It'd be really scary to do. Okay. And there could be genuine things to be afraid of, like the slander and like the gossip and like losing jobs and losing communities, and maybe children stay when parents go, or vice versa. There's so much that goes into this. So very much a nuanced one-on-one kind of conversation and those kinds of details and specifics. And yet bigger picture, absolutely. We have to be able to remove ourselves and then give ourselves some time to get our feet under us and to feel what we need to feel too. Probably some grieving. There may be some anger, just a part of grieving. There could be a lot that goes on. So again, it doesn't mean for any of you who would be listening to this and be like, well, that sounds passive, Josh. That sounds passive. Does, like, right? We need to go to bat. There's a reason, right? There's a reason we're not doing that in this kind of structure when we have to get ourselves out.
Yeah. No, and it does sound so passive. It does. But I mean, I've been with organizations. I've heard HR. I've spoken at places where HR is still trying to figure out how to hire a diagnosable, horrible narcissist, someone who's even verbally, physically at times, hurting people. I've seen organizations that are barely able to let go of someone who's hurting children physically or sexually. And so if that's where we're actually at in 2025, is we can barely get rid of someone who's doing those kind of black and white things, then why in the world would a system that's going to be more nuanced, that one person's going to be a bit of an enforcer, the other one's going to be passive aggressive, like, you see how we're just smoke and mirrors and all this. And so I think in many ways it's our own values, our own, like, I just want to be someone who stands up for others, are then being misallocated to a situation that would be so unlikely to change. And that's something that I think is important to note too, as an organization. If you're in an organization, maybe you're in leadership and you're listening to some of this and you're saying, oh my gosh, I think our organization is kind of narcissistic. It will cost more time and energy and money and self-reflection than almost all organizations are willing to put in to change the organization. And I've rarely seen it happen. I have seen it, but it's so much effort, so much for a place to really change from the inside out and to actually become a safe and healthy organization. So if you're not one of those key people, please don't waste your time, to be honest with you.
Right. Yeah. Again, get yourself out. And then if at some point you're like, wow, I really am feeling a need to warn others, you can absolutely explore that.
Yes.
But step one is you got to get out. Yes. First, you got to get out. Well, I'm wondering, with that example you just gave, do you think in those kinds of scenarios, there is more of a collective empathy that is aimed in the wrong place, in the wrong direction? It's for the leader, because I hear that a lot, right? The leader's the victim. The person who's the perpetrator is actually the victim. Yeah. And I'm not saying that there is always a perpetrator and always a victim and always there isn't. I'm not saying that. But in these situations, it's like, oh my goodness, the poor leader. So is it an example of collective empathy being directed wrongly, or is there just a lack of it altogether?
Fear is kind of what comes to mind there.
Okay.
And we might be able to kind of answer this in a couple different ways. But fear of those dynamic leaders, of those people that have just done so much good disappearing, and then what do we have? This is part of where I think narcissistic systems tend to kind of try to interweave your identity with them. If you're being assimilated, then you go to such and such organization, or you volunteer here, or you work at this place. And so when that happens, you see a lot of fear of, well, we can't lose the Jane or John. We can't actually do the things to actually make the change. And so very often I think empathy sure is low, but it's more of a kind of understanding from the organization when you are bringing up concerns from the outside or in. There's a recognition of we may not make it without that person. So your concerns are minimized. It's not as big a deal as us losing our sense of self and leadership.
So there's a prioritization.
Yes. It's very mercenary. It's very just, just kind of this like efficiency. Your concerns are not as important as us having our aligned community and identity, and therefore kindly get out. We're not kindly.
Well, and how do you think organizations attract narcissistic leaders, and or is it the narcissistic leader more so who's just kind of on the hunt, so to speak? How do you think this happens?
I think it's a little bit of both. I think for a lot of organizations, we're looking for clarity. We're tribal by nature is what I would say. And so we're all looking for purpose. And especially as we've become a society that is much more postmodern and much more nuanced in some areas, sometimes then the deficit is there's no clarity in life. I mean, for our great grandparents, it was kind of the idea of your parents were this career path, so you were probably going in similar. And while that had its harms, it did. Now we've almost gone so far to the other direction to where there's just a lot of ambiguity in life. And so I think for a lot of us, the natural pull is find someone who has answers, find a good safe harbor for you, your friends, your family, whatever, and never leave. And that just tends to attract a lot of black and white thinking, at least by itself.
Yeah. And when we see bringing that into the context of, say, a church or any kind of Christian organization, we see this can look like people who are saying, okay, well, we have the one way that this has to look, right? We can get into holiness standards. We can get into legalism. We can get into, you can take any kind of like, I would consider it more like fringes, the different movements on the different edges all around, these more kind of extremist in one way or another. And that's okay, well, this is the only answer. And while I will say from a Christian worldview that there are boundaries within scripture, if we're claiming Christianity, there are boundaries within certain things, right? Like,
yes.
If someone's going to say Jesus is not God, okay, well, that's not going to work within Christianity. You could have a different worldview, like you have the right to choose that, but you can't say it's Christianity. And I do run into some of that, or it's like he's a lesser deity, or he's what. It's like, well, it's not Christianity anymore. Like that would be a heresy of this faith,
of course.
And so, right, and so there are parameters, and yet there's also room to agree to disagree on many things. And that's the call to unity we see on repeat in the New Testament is unity. And that's something we're contrasting to when we're thinking about these organizations, these structures that are narcissistic is no, like you opened up with, Josh, we're the one church. We've got it. And it's been so eye-opening for me over the past 5 years because, well, actually, it started as a teenager because I went to Mass with a friend I was growing up with, and I went to Mass with her as a teenager. I wasn't supposed to go to Mass with her. I went to Mass with her.
Oh, sure. How dare you?
Of course, right? Definitely wasn't supposed to do that. So went to Mass with her. And I remember the priest saying. He was talking about, things going on culturally and throughout the world. And he landed it this way. And I cannot say it without smiling because I think, I've heard it across the board. This is not coming at Catholicism. I mean, it's coming at what I grew up. It's just this perception can pop up literally anywhere. But he landed it with someday everyone will recognize that they're a part of the one true church with it, which is the Catholic Church.
Yeah.
And I'm like, and I'm sitting there in a cult, like about to go home to my cult. And I'm like,
of course.
Oh no, you guys aren't.
Yeah.
I am. We are. But I've seen that play out to varying degrees all throughout Christendom and beyond. I mean, it's just all over. Like this can happen across denominations and also not. I mean, there's great healthy places out there. Right now we're speaking to the ones who aren't. So, but it's been interesting to me to see it pop up in so many mainstream areas because in my world that would have been indicative of a cult. But it's not. It's cult-ish. Like it's got some cult feels to it.
Yeah, it's got a little vibe to it for sure.
Yeah, it does. But it won't necessarily meet all the markers. And yet, wow, this is a pervasive issue. This kind of idea, and it's devastating because what if you move? I mean, I've thought of that with some scenarios where I'm like, you literally might have to move, and there isn't one of these churches over there, and so you're just lost now. You're just going to be less than for the rest of time because you had to like move to take care of mom or something. It's just, it goes way too far. It is, it's devastating to see. And again, not exclusive to cults. So please hear me. If you have experienced this, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's a cult, but it does mean that there's a problem again. And then it's like, okay, let's assess what is this problem and the varying degrees of it. And do I need to get out?
Right.
And quite possibly, yes. So.
That's a great point. And I think too, you just even naming the move, that's one of the main strings I see. If it's not a family system that's narcissistic, if it's not a job, so often it's just, well, I moved to be close to this place or all my friends go there. There's such a social pressure that can really make you feel like you're in the wilderness. You're alone, you're isolated. And that is, for many of us, unthinkable. And it does take a lot of courage to make that move, like you're saying, even if it's a back out slowly and then advocate from the outside. That can be a very lonely journey and something that I would highly encourage everyone. Do it with dear friends, with people praying for you, with people walking alongside you in that, because it is not for the faint of heart.
Right. Well, and moving towards more of that healing side of things. So what would you say are some steps for healing for this kind of system?
So I hope today's language has even been helpful of the idea of a system, an organization, a group of people being narcissistic. Because there's a lot of stuff that's come out, a lot of good research and healing processes. I mean, I know you've done a lot of work in this area as well of just what does it look like to heal from a narcissist and spiritual abuse and things. And so even just knowing your journey is going to look very similar to someone who's been abused by a narcissist or who's had an incredibly awful parent who's traumatized them in different ways. Once we can start even just saying, you know what, this is very similar. In fact, the impact might be just as devastating, even though there was no one clear kind of evil doer in your life, is starting there by naming it, by identifying it. And then from there, it's even being able to recognize how much of your journey is kind of a healing and starting over. So for a lot of people, they need to leave the organization so they're not just kind of being brought back in. There's kind of a gravitational pull for many different types of toxic organizations. And so finding old friends that yet lost touch with who aren't in that group, being able to go back to when you first, fell in love with the Lord, or people who have been healthy in your life, the old mentors. I find for a lot of people, reconnecting with those who have been healthy in your life is one of the first steps, because somewhere along the way, those people disappeared or got lost, or you're even starting from scratch. And sometimes you're like asking a friend, like, Who are the people who are patient and kind and full of grace rather than rigid, like what I've experienced.
Yes. And I hear so many wonderful stories of people who do exactly that. And it can be, let me say it that way, because I will mention sometimes the people that we're trying to reconnect with, they're not as open to it.
Yeah.
They maybe suffered a loss of you at some point. They're not ready. They may need some time to readjust to the idea of reconnecting. Maybe they didn't think that was ever going to happen. They have grieved that loss. They're feeling some trepidation in regards to rebuilding trust. And so having that empathy and compassion for the other person, that it's highly unlikely that they would have no love or care for you or be glad that you are making a transition in your life. It's coming from a place of their own wounding. And so being able to have that hopefully mutual understanding along the way.
Yeah.
I also want to share though, that there are many stories of it being a really healing practice. And there's such good that can come from it. And that reconnection can be a really beautiful thing. So I love that as a suggestion for anyone who has that opportunity in their life. It can, it can be really good. I'm thinking of some stories right now. I'm like, oh yes, people where I'm so glad that they did that.
Yeah.
And others where I know it's been sad, and yet they still needed to. There's times where we need to because we wonder otherwise, and so it can be worth again thinking about your timing, making sure that you have good support in case it doesn't go as you're hoping it will. Like that's so important. Like, what do you have going for yourself? Just in case it feels like a bit of a setback. It won't be, because it's really a step forward if this is something that's weighing on you and it's something you're like, gosh, I really think I need to send this message. I need to reach out. I need to try. Maybe need to share some of my story so that they better understand what happened.
Yeah.
And so, those can be really important steps for somebody along their journey. So with that, yes, I would just say to make sure that you're well supported, because we don't know what the outcome will be.
Right. Well, no expectation is kind of what I'm hearing as you share that of like, okay, you're doing this because this is good. If it leads to a dear friend reconnecting or community, great. If it's the one time coffee that the two of you have in a good way, where it's like, okay, we clarified some things, we kind of hurt each other, but there's not ongoing relationship, that's okay too. And so I hear you just kind of having even a lot of grace for what that person's walking through as well.
Yeah, I think that's important. And it can be difficult to do sometimes when the person doing the reaching out is like, wow, I've just really been through it.
Yes.
And I've been through it at the hands of someone else. And yet, because of that, I've caused some hurt too.
Mm-hmm.
And I would have never done that. Like, I thought what I was doing was right, or I just, my schedule was so crazy because I was doing so much for this organization and people just kind of fell off. Like, there wasn't anything even directly done. It was just indirectly. I kind of just went missing.
Yeah.
And being able to come back and own that, can be really beautiful and be really important for someone as well. And just knowing that, something I had to come to terms with. This might sound kind of sad, but it's just true. I came to terms with it a while ago, so I'm okay. I'm okay now. But I had to come to terms with, it does actually affect others if I don't show up.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like, it does actually matter, because I really didn't think it mattered at all. And it wasn't in like a poor me sort of way. It was in just a disconnect of thinking, well, other people are going to be there. It's not going to be so noticeable if I am or not. It wasn't even this like, right? It wasn't even like over the, at one point it was pretty self-deprecating, but at another point it wasn't. It was just a disconnect because I hadn't been used to that sort of impact being reflected back to me. So when it was reflected back, I'm like, oh, wow, okay, it is going to hurt someone if I do A, B, or C. It's unintentional, but it is. Well, I don't want to hurt them. And they also matter to me. So I love that I'm wanted to be there and I want to be there. And so, but there was this whole recalibrating that had to happen.
Yeah,
and I
your
had to
absence is
approach.
missed. It's beautiful.
Yes. Right. And I had to approach things very differently. And so I just want to offer that for people. If you're like, wow, well, I had all this going on. these people are now really hurt. Like I didn't directly do anything. They likely noticed your absence and they felt that pain. And it can be interpreted too as like, well, you didn't want to be there, or, they didn't matter as much to you, maybe as you mattered to them. And that could totally not be true, because undue influence is real. And there's probably a lot of expectation that you were navigating on yourself if you were in a narcissistic system, working too many hours, doing too many things, all of it. And so there's more to that. It's not really that simple. But that framework was really helpful for me. It helped me, one, recognize my value in the relationship, and two, make sure I was reflecting their value to me appropriately, congruently to what I actually felt.
No, that's so powerful. And I appreciate you sharing even just about how you were noticing that first self-deprecating and then just even unaware of the impact as well. And then knowing that you were missed. That's, I think very well said.
Well, I want to wrap this up, bringing it back to, okay, if someone is an organization, someone is not an organization. Right. If a person is listening to this and they're a part of an organization, they're like, I don't want to be this. I know we talked about this in the first episode too. If it's like, am I heading toward being a narcissist? I get asked that a lot. Genuine people who are genuinely concerned. Sure. They're like, am I a narcissist? I'm like, it's a really good indicator that you're asking. Really good sign that you're asking.
Love the sign of help.
We're typically not going to hear that question from someone who is. And so if someone is listening, they're like, okay, I'm a part of an organization. I want to be proactive here. I want to guard against becoming narcissistic. I don't want to attract a narcissistic leader. I don't want to end up fighting to hire someone who is, like you had mentioned earlier, or holding on to someone who is. Like, what practical rhythms can I have going on? Feedback, how do we approach this? How am I going to be proactive in protecting?
Yeah. So I think there's so many things you could do with this, but you'll notice some themes as we're talking. And I'm assuming this person's in an organization that hopefully isn't fully narcissistic. If there is, that's kind of probably a whole other podcast episode in some ways of just what does it look like to do triage in a really, really toxic situation. But one of the first areas I find is healthy organizations are real about their faults without a 4-step plan for how to improve things. I think a lot of organizations will share faults because they know they're kind of supposed to not be perfect. But then there's this agenda, there's this campaign, there's this, and here's how we're fixing that. So really, it's almost like they're covertly saying we have no real faults. An organization just says, you know what, we're not the best at blank. Or even this is a point of struggle for us. I think even just that type of vulnerability is really important and something that you can hear yourself. If you hear that and you kind of have like a gut check of, oh gosh, what will happen? That's probably a good sign that vulnerability is not a regular part of your organization. So being able to name those things without going there. I would also say too, healthy organizations have a lot of people that are actually in the building regularly. I've seen a lot of narcissistic structures that hire consultants, even great consultants, or outside HR help, or counselors, or whoever. But if the people aren't in the organization, if they're not around it regularly, if they're not actually getting to see what a Monday morning meeting looks like, or the Sunday service or whatnot, then very often you can kind of delude yourself into thinking that we're healthier than we are. So I've seen some organizations have regular staff that basically have third-party full-time jobs that are there to better assess. I've seen places that have HR that are actually involved in health and ongoing. You can do 360 reviews. It doesn't matter necessarily which kind of metric or kind of campaign you do to try to better self-assess, but it has to be ongoing and it has to have some real authority to it. Otherwise, it's just the printout that then the unhealthy structure can discard. So who are the Pauls in this organization's life? Who are the people that are regularly there to the Timothy, right? The mentor, the people that they are saying, we respect this person and we really want to grow, that isn't in the organization, because they're going to bring out your worst moments. They're going to show you all your weaknesses. So those would be the first two, the transparency, the outside actually in the building authority, so they actually know what's going on. And then lastly, I would say an organization that really better visualizes, like you mentioned stories earlier of health and success. that you actually are keeping on your mind, whether that's prayer, whether that's mindful meditation, but you're keeping like, man, I really love that this team member is doing so well. I really love that this person's been through this terrible season, health stuff, postpartum, whatever it is. Where is your mind going when you evaluate your organization? And I think so much of us can easily go to the outside, to the metrics, like we've said, versus just, I love them in an organization. This person's just doing great, and so many others are as well.
Those were really good points. One that particularly stood out to me was the having people in the building. Yeah, I can absolutely see that. So people just the proximity, really just proximity. Like you're just not going to know. And we talk about that in beEmboldened in regards to proximity to, if we're looking at a church, for example, proximity to leadership to even know if the character is decent or not. To the best we can still know because we don't live with them. But again, we're increasing proximity to be able to be more informed as to who am I working with? Like, who am I learning from? Like, what's going on here? And that can help build trust. So again, as we're increasing proximity, we have more information. Yeah. And that information is going to be really helpful in being proactive. Like we're talking about also identifying issues, of course. But that's a part of being proactive is if we can identify early, then we're able to do something about it, especially collectively. Yes. As a team. So excellent points. I would be very surprised if any of you who have listened to this do not have questions. So I know this topic brings up a lot of questions, and I was very excited when Josh offered to come back on to have this conversation about systems to go along with the conversation about individuals, because this is really, really relevant here at beEmboldened too. I know it's relevant to all of us. Mm-hmm. So with that being said, we've assumed that there will be questions about both. So if you want to go ahead and listen to the first episode, again, it's not out there as a part 1 and a part 2. So if you just want to, we can also link it down below. We can link it in the show notes so that you can just easily click and go to the other one. So not a part 1 and part 2, but we'll make it easy for you to find it. But anticipating that people are going to have questions, we do have a Q&A scheduled. So, and I'm pulling up the exact date of that. It's Thursday, January 29th. So by the time you hear this, it'll be about 2 months away. So great opportunity to put it on your calendar. You can then forget about it through the holidays, but go ahead and put it on your calendar. This is going to be a special event with Josh. It's from 6:30 p.m. to 8 p.m. Central Time, again on Thursday, January 29th. And it's going to be done through our BE Plus platform. So why that's relevant? It's a really easy way for us to be able to bring things like this to our audience. So we're starting to do it more. We have things going on through the end of the year. Josh is going to kick us off in January. You are able to, it's a month-to-month subscription that we have at beEmboldened. There's a lot that comes with it. There's virtual groups. If you want to be a part of virtual mentoring is what we call it. So we've got one of our trained facilitators along with others who show up. Facilitator is creating that safe environment to be able to process through some of what you've experienced, be able to hear from others, again, in a safe, facilitated way. There's a blog that gets written every month by a published author. There's a lot of benefits, discounts, things like that. But it's also access to conversations like this Q&A that we're going to have. So I just wanted to mention that for all of you, because yes, if you're listening and you're like, wow, I really want to ask Josh this, we really dropped the ball and didn't ask him that. I really think this would have been a great follow-up question. You will have your opportunity. So if you want to check out our website, make sure you're subscribed with us. You can jump on our website, subscribe to our emails if you're down for that. Definitely follow us here, of course, that you get new episodes. You'll be able to sign up for that Q&A. And if you just want to do BE Plus for the 1 month, then you can do it. You can immediately cancel. So you can cancel at any time. So if you're like, no, I just want to pay the $24 for an individual or $39 for a couple per month. If you're like, I'm just going to do it one time so that I can do this and then I'm done. You're welcome to do that. You can go read all the blogs, use your discount however you want, and be able to have this conversation and call it. But I'm really excited to bring this to you. I just wanted to mention that because, again, I think a lot of you are going to have questions. We anticipated it. Josh is being incredibly generous with his time, coming back, wanting to help answer that for all of you. If the budget is a concern, please send me an email. We will figure that out. Okay, please don't let that be a barrier. We want to make sure that you're there and you get your questions answered. If that is of importance to you, we will make that happen. So please send an email, hello@beEmboldened.com. Thank you all for being here. Josh, thank you so much for being here again.
You're welcome. It's been great to be here. So glad we got to talk.
All right. Everyone, happy holidays, and we will see you soon.